In this video, I want to give you some tips about sheathing the walls of your smokehouse. Now, I've spoken in other parts of the course about my preference for using 1.5 inch thick solid wood for wall and roof sheathing. It's strong and solid, and it hides fasteners, and it doesn't have urea formaldehyde glue in it like sheet materials do. So it's my preference. Now, I mentioned also in other spots in the course that I feel perfectly fine using current modern day pressure treated lumber for these boards, certainly down at the bottom, if not the whole way up. Now, that's because nowadays the pressure treating chemicals are copper based, and I don't think there's any issue with toxicity. In my opinion, in a situation like this. You may feel differently, you might want to use cedar. But if you are using some sort of pressure-treated material, this bottom course is going to be in full contact with the soil. In fact, you're going to be building up a little bit of soil inside here to make a raised floor. There's going to be some splashing from rain on the outside. So if you want to be very diligent, I mean, this is my recommendation, you'd go with what they call a pressure-treated lumber here on the bottom course that's made for pressure-treated wood foundations. Now, believe it or not, in many parts of the world, you can build a foundation, an underground foundation, out of wood using the right kind of pressure-treated lumber. It never rots, essentially. They treat it so well that it just doesn't rot, ever. Even in full contact. So the bottom course, you might want to consider that material there if you're building for the long haul, like I always do. Another thing to pay attention to here is to start these bottom courses especially, to start them off so they're level, because they're going to set the stage for everything else that goes higher. Even still, put a level on your boards, say just before you install the third or fourth course. Because even if you started the first course level, it's conceivable you'll start getting out of level eventually, and you can steer it back a bit over the next few courses if you are out of whack. So check that. Now, also, when you're cutting boards to length, you've got long planks and you need to cut boards, say, for these side pieces or the back, or these little pieces on either side of the door. When you're cutting lumber out of a plank, always pay attention to the quality of wood at what will be the end of the parts. So in this case, what's the wood like here? What's the wood like here? And when I say what's the wood like, I mean, is it clear, or does it have some knots in it or something? Knots might look nice, but they're also structurally unstable, and it can be, you can cause the board to split if there's a knot here and you happen to drive a screw or nail through it. So position your boards so that any knots and swirly grain and defects and things are away from the end points as well, at least. If there's one that lands on this mid post here, then that's no big deal. But the ends you do have to pay attention to, and best practices dictate that you try to make that as clear as possible. Now, should you use screws or nails to fasten these boards? Well, either will work. I think in a case like this, I would use, if I could, nails driven with an air nailer or some sort of hoseless power nailer. That would work fine. My policy is always to use galvanized fasteners, even when, strictly speaking, I don't need to. Like, for instance, you could use regular plain ungalvanized fasteners for these boards, and presumably you're going to be covering the outside with cedar shingles to give it some extra weather protection. So technically those nails shouldn't get wet. But my feeling is, the added expense is minuscule. And what happens if one day, 100 years from now, someone comes along and wants to refurbish this old forgotten smokehouse, and the cedar shingles are all worn out and falling off, and the roof boards have been exposed to the weather for the last 25 years, who knows? Your choice of rust-resistant, rust-proof galvanized fasteners could be the difference between being able to refurbish this or not. I mean, regular plain fasteners might be all rusted out, and why not do the future a little bit of a favor? Spend a few extra pennies always on fasteners that resist corrosion. I don't see any reason not to, really. So, one other thing, this gable treatment here, these are thick boards, and they are going to fasten to the face of rafters. There will be in the real smokehouse, there would be a rafter here and a rafter here, and that's what secures the end of these roof boards. Because you've made it with thick material, you don't need any more backing other than that. It's strong enough to be self-supporting. However, install these boards after you have installed the rafters. And the reason for that is because the rafters will give you a guide. So you put the rafter there, the rafter's in place, it's nailed down, you lay down your board, you mark a pencil line here, following the rafter, here, following the rafter. You take it down, you cut it, you put it back, nail it to the rafter, continue on up and do the next one. That's the most efficient way to do this, and you'll find that you get a nice fit and the roof boards will go on properly without riding on any extra wood that might be present here from the gable sheathing.